Question for everyone. Do any of you have a tradition at home that you do for a special holiday or any occasion that no one else does? Anybody? Really? It's like 4 of us? Okay. All right. Maybe like 6. In Judaism, we call this a minhag. A minhag, meaning a custom, is carried as an enhancement of Jewish practice, but not considered Jewish law initially. Some minhagim, which is plural for customs, are family-based, and others are more widely known. They cover a wide range of variations. Some deal with the service order, while others are around the home practices, to name a few. Passing around the Passover Seder over someone else's head during the Seder, hitting one another with scallions as we retell the Haggadah, having a fish on the Rosh Hashanah table, or perhaps one we're all familiar with, smashing a glass at the end of the wedding ceremony. All minhagim. Some customs are established in folklore, while others have been imposed by religious authorities and have been maintained for so long that they've become integrated into the fabric of a community in a meaningful and enriching way. There are minhagim that are attached to their country of origin or culture, where Jews have lived for many years and are later added by official Jewish authorities. For example, many of you who are installation know that we wore the kaftan, the Moroccan garb. It is worn by North Africans in general, but Jews as well in Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, and other Arabic-speaking countries. As a result, Jews living in these countries have for centuries worn this garb and created sacred Jewish celebrations that were influenced by living in Middle Eastern countries. These minhagim are widely observed and part of the norm for many Jews around the world, including my tradition. So, if minhagim are connected to customs, what is the opposite of a minhag? That, my friends, is called halakha. Halakha literally means a path of the right way. These are rules or laws that are grounded in text or later rabbinic teachings. And this is a category that is directly linked to obligations that are explicitly named in the Torah. So these include both commandments, things we're supposed to perform, and prohibitions, things we are not supposed to do. So I'd like to play a little game this morning, if that's all right with everyone. Welcome to halakha or minhag, a game where the rabbi shouts out a Jewish practice and you respond by saying halakha, meaning a binding law, or minhag, a custom that sometimes gets codified with time. Ready? Okay. Don't all jump at once. Wearing a kippah, halakha or minhag? Once again? Wow, nice. That's a good mix. It's a minhag. It is a custom. It comes from our Talmud and later writings about wearing our heads during prayer, not necessarily on the everyday, but Jews with time have decided to show their Judaism by wearing a kippah all the time. Number 2, to dwell in a sukkah and shake the lulav. Was there a third option somewhere? Okay. Well, if you said halakha, you were right. This is in the book of Leviticus. And what's so interesting is there is no blessing to build a sukkah. There's no obligation to build a sukkah. You must but dwell in one, like your neighbors or your temples. Last but not least, this is such a favorite of mine. Standing during the Shema. It is a minhag and halakha. What? Gotcha. What you're supposed to do with the Shema is you're actually supposed to do what you were doing right before. So if you were doing the Baruch Hu, which is a standing prayer right before, then you remain standing for the Shema. If the rabbi says something very important, as rabbis always do, or if you were doing a prayer that is seated, then you remain seated. But in Reformed tradition, we often stand for the Shema as a way of showing respect and love to God. But it is, nonetheless, kind of a combination. So minhag, now that we got a sense for what it is a custom that is developed for worthy and religious reasons and continues long enough to become religiously binding. Minhag is so significant that once people become accustomed to a particular ritual for a long period of time, it has a stronghold in Jewish practice. As a matter of fact, if a minhag and a halacha become contradictory, which happens, the minhag, the custom, holds the authority. It supersedes even biblical law. Minhag plays an important role in Judaism because it is cultivated by the people in their time. It helps us tell our story through Jewish traditions. For example, in the Reform movement, we all stand during the mourner's Kaddish. Other movements don't necessarily do that. There are two reasons we all stand during the mourner's Kaddish. The first is to honor all those who didn't have anyone to say Kaddish for them during the Holocaust. It was established after World War II. And the second is to support our friends and loved ones who are reciting Kaddish for their beloved. The mourner's Kaddish is something we are so accustomed to doing at the end of our services. I often ask myself, does anybody ever wonder why we stand? Now we know. I'd like to share another example, perhaps a little bit lighter. Jews of the Middle East use dates and nuts in their charoset. Charoset is the food that is eaten to represent the brick and mortar the Israelites used to build the pyramids in Egypt. Dates and nuts are often used in Middle Eastern cuisine and were adapted into the Seder in a meaningful way with time. Minhagim aren't just an integral part of Jewish practice. They help us express ourselves and make Judaism ours. On Yom Kippur, we just read Parashat Nitzavim. Nitzavim comes from the root natzav, meaning to station oneself or to stand upright. At its core, the word has an implicit sense of commitment attached to it. It requires action. The Torah portion opens with, Atem netzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Adonai kol Israel. As for you, you all stand before God, all of Israel today. This passage fervently conveys this idea that we are all obligated to stand for our beliefs and our convictions. And the following passage, it expounds even further on what that means. Your children, your spouses, and even the stranger within you, from woodchopper to water drawer, to enter into a covenant with God. And then a few verses down, it says, God is making a covenant with you, and not with you alone, but both with those of you who are standing here on this day before Adonai, and with those who are not here this day. Those who are not here this day, where did they go? Did they not get the memo from God that they're creating an everlasting, lifelong covenant together? Why does our Torah say something like that? We know that in every word in Torah is significant. So who were the individuals that were missing? The answer is us. You, and me. We were not physically there in the moment per se. Our tradition takes into account that while future generations weren't recommitting to God and the community in that moment, the future generations would carry the covenant with God in so many different forms. And this promise with God includes all of us thousands of years later. God spoke to the Israelites in that moment, and our Torah records a very special message for us, the Jews of the future, that we too are a part of this covenant. The covenant is for us to accept and pass down to the next generation after us. Rashi, a French 11th century commentator, affirms this notion in his commentary. He says the phrase, "for those who are not here today," doesn't reference those who stepped away from the covenant conversation for a few moments to make a phone call in the middle of the desert. The phrase directly speaks to all of the future generations who were born from the Israelites, and that's us. And if that's the case, what does that mean for us today? Luckily, the Torah tells us exactly what to do. The verses that follow help bring us into the fold to understand what it means to keep our covenant with God in this day and age. The Torah says, you know what it was like to be a slave in Egypt. We reenact the history every single year at our Seder tables. We saw terrible pain in Egypt, and when the Israelites finally escaped slavery, they made the mistake of losing themselves and worshiped idols in the desert out of desperation. We know that happens to people when they feel lost and desperate. They turn to bad habits which can further develop societal evils. We know that about our societies, those who don't have clear boundaries. At first read, our Torah can seem like a list of obligations that seem dense and stringent and sometimes even a little irrelevant. But our commandments and communal obligations are there to help guide and cultivate a moral society that is rooted in values that strengthen our world with each generation. And today, I would like to invite each and every one of us to think about our role in disseminating our covenant to our generation as well as the next generation. I want us to be able to articulate these words into action, which part of our covenant we maintain each day that passes forward. What is our role as individuals, as a community, in our families? And to help us do that, I bring us back to the conversation about halakha and minhag. The halakha, the laws that are there to guide us. And when we dive deeply and understand them, we can create really meaningful minhagim, customs and practices that help us understand our Judaism and how we celebrate Judaism today, not the Judaism of thousands of years ago. There's a question I love to ask in a classroom setting when I'm teaching Jewish identity. I ask my learners to jot down a few notes about what makes them Jewish. How do you define your Judaism? And people will often answer with what they're not. Well, I don't keep kosher. I don't go to services regularly. I don't really believe in God. And I find this really perplexing because nowhere else in our lives do we do this, right? If I say, what do you do for a living? You're not going to say, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a professor. I'm not a rabbi, right? You would just tell me what you do for a living. So what happens here? Why do we get stuck with this question? Why do we get in the weeds with this question? I'd like for us to think about how we can explore our Judaism meaningfully in this year to come, to lenatzev, to nitzavim, to stand for what our Judaism is today by answering in the positive, not in the negative. To stand confidently with conviction and comfortably articulate our Judaism through our minhagim, our customs, and other practices that we find meaningful. This way we not only convey who we actually are and what we stand for, but what we can do more deliberately, attach ourselves to rituals that are life-changing, connect us to our tradition, members of our family and our community, and feel our legacy will live on for the generations to come. As your rabbi, it is both my honor and privilege to stand beside you on this journey and create the spaces and time to reveal your link and legacy of our covenant. This joyful exploration will nourish and enrich your days and those of the generations after us. I wish you all an easy fast, a Gmar Tov, and a Shana Tova. May you be sealed in the book of life and feel a renewed sense of purpose in this coming year.